Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible comes together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Fletcher.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Jay.
And today's story is about Jacob.
Wait, didn't we already do him?
Well,
years ago.
Yeah,
And by years, I mean last year.
A year.
Yes, during season 1, as we talked about genealogies, we did talk about Jacob. But we're going to take a little bit of a different focus and approach today.
Okay.
But we can't get into that until we cover our question.
No story talk until after the question.
No story until we've adequately wasted a bit of time. All right. Time to come clean, guys. Jacob, deceiver, liar. We're going to talk about him and his brother. What have you stolen or claimed was yours from your sibling?
Or vice versa,
Or
I think we've
siblings,
agreed to.
or vice versa.
I can go first. It's an easy one. So what was I don't know, 18 years old. And my parents had just bought my brother and I a car, and it was ours to share. But I, being the older brother, slowly just drove it more often because I needed it more often because he was still in high school.
Yeah.
And then eventually I just kind of kept driving it. And then I got married and moved out and just brought it with me. And then the ownership's now in my name.
Is it?
And he has a different car, so
Is
it's
it
all
covered in
settled.
stickers?
It is covered in stickers. And it's been good to me for the last 5 years. I've put like 200,000 kilometers on it. But
Wow. I do believe that
my car.
there is a picture in our Instagram of the three of us packed into that
Yes.
there
vehicle.
you go. That's true.
That is true. That was a road trip day. Just
And
kidding.
it's-
It wasn't a road
It wasn't.
trip.
There was no way we would do a road trip in that thing.
I have done a road trip in the backseat of
Not
that car.
not with the three of us.
No, but with
That
4
would-
people.
Oh
and
man!
I was in the back seat. It was a lot of fun.
Oh my.
I believe this is the same car that presented you with some drive-through issues, where you lost or you dropped a whole pocket full of change. Is it not?
I've done everything in that car. Any bad car events have happened in that car. Car accidents,
Amazing.
car spills, car anything.
It's funny because I will talk about this car. Like I'll say, "Oh yeah, my cousin has like stickers all over the front." They're like, "I think I've seen that car." Is
Everybody
it,
I meet has
Is
said.
it red?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah. They're like, "I've seen that car."
Everybody has seen that car, and I run into like random people. I buy Kijiji things up. Oh, I've seen your car around town before. I'm like, oh, great.
very
Everybody knows where I
identifiable.
am at all times.
Yeah, it's easy to stalk you.
Yeah,
so if
exactly.
you want to stalk Fletcher, look for the car with stickers on it.
There you go.
Please.
There you go. Mine went the other way. It was I got swindled, sort of. So I was younger, and in the apartment that I grew up in, it was it was an impressive apartment. Actually, it had 2 stories to it and 3 bedrooms, and so there's the master bedroom, obviously, and then the 2 other bedrooms. But the 2 other bedrooms, one was almost twice as large as the other, and my sister, being older, that was her bedroom. And one day she came up to me and said, "Do you want to switch bedrooms?" And I was like, "Where is this coming from?" Yes, I do.
course.
I do want to switch bedrooms. And so we moved everything around, and it took me about 24 hours to realize that bedroom had become infested with ladybugs.
Wow.
Hilarious.
Like absolutely infested
Smooth.
with
That's
ladybugs.
hilarious.
And then I realized exactly why my sister had wanted to switch bedrooms with me. A couple years later, she came begging. She wanted the bedroom back, and
Was
I was
the
like,
infestation
infestation
cleared
was
out?
gone. It was
Oh.
like it was
Is it temporary?
ladybugs. It's like one season they come and then they're gone, right?
There you
And then
go.
she wanted it back, and I was like, "No way, you swindled me into it."
That's
And
funny.
eventually, I think we did switch back, but I don't think I leveraged it. I didn't leverage enough to
I
get.
thought you were going to say there was no choice. She kind of just forced you out of it.
It's possible. I don't know. Maybe she paid me or
Older
something.
siblings, they have all the authority.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I know
Yeah,
this
yeah.
very well.
I honestly don't have an answer to this question. I know they're like, "Oh, you got to steal something." I'm like, not really.
She's just a really honest
He
person.
said, "I'm completely innocent in all my doings with my brother,
Just
and
I've
he is
never
completely
stolen
innocent."
She's
anything.
just
And
not ready to come clean
Yeah.
about
No,
She's hiding. Greg,
There's
if you're listening
something.
to this,
We need to know.
What has she
Greg,
stolen?
if you are listening and I've stolen something from you, let me know. But I genuinely
Email
do not
us.
think of anything. And I don't think of anything that he's stolen
Actually,
from
I'm
me
gonna
either,
see. I'm gonna
so-
see your mom this week. I'm gonna ask her.
yeah.
Okay.
Like,
There we go. We'll
is there
see.
anything that Abby
The
has
dirty
swindled
dishes.
her out of her brother?
No, listen, we did not always get along. I'll be honest about that. But it wasn't about like stealing and that kind and like rights. It was all about we had different interests. So I don't know. I can't think of anything. So sorry, can't answer the question.
All right,
Oh, well.
we're gonna let you off, but we're gonna
Hesitantly.
encourage any of your listening family members to chime in and
Sure.
let us know,
Yes.
as we do with the rest of you. So if you have a great story of something that you have
Swindled.
laid claim to
Laid
or,
claim,
or
yes.
swindled out of a sibling, or that you've had swindled away from you, we'd love to hear about it. Let us know, story@bfmc.org or The Story Fulfilled Podcast, or at The Story Fulfilled Podcast Instagram. Yeah. So, and of course, as always, we encourage you to read the stories for yourselves to get the whole picture of what is going on. And today's story takes place in Genesis.
Again,
Again,
we're back.
which is where we were last week when we talked about Sarai and Abram, who then became Sarah and Abraham.
I made that hard for you. I can tell. He's
Yeah.
like trying to read what the back.
Yeah,
read the recap, and I'm typing all sorts of names.
that's it.
He can't figure it out.
So Sarah had a struggle to have children, and there was just their relationship with God that we saw unfold. And at the end of the story, we talked about the birth of their son Isaac. And since this season is about unlikely people, Isaac, who is the promised child, is not unlikely necessarily, but he is the beginning of our story. And so, as is the case in biblical stories, a young man needs a wife. And so Abraham sends his servants back to his hometown to find a wife for their family, for Isaac. Eventually, the servant finds a woman named Rebecca, and it's a pretty neat story of how she is found that you can read about in Genesis 24. And she's a relative. She was Abraham's grandniece, and they brought her back to marry Isaac. But of course, there's a problem. Not unlike Isaac's mother, Rebecca was barren.
Mm-hmm. And we might want to point out, family member and relative are in the good sense.
Yes.
In this way.
Yes.
They're people that share the same values, and they're from the same family. They're not like, okay, they're not brothers and sisters here. That's going to make it any problematic source.
Yeah.
It was more preserve their culture and keep it.
Society was tribal
Yeah.
at the time, and so remaining within your tribe was encouraged and important for the well-being of the tribe.
Absolutely. So as for what's going on in the world at the time, it really depends when you date Abraham, like we talked about last week. And so Jacob is born, depending again when you date Abraham, around 1800 BC or before or after that. And in the region, kind of there's Mesopotamia, who's controlled by the Amorites. Egypt is in its Middle Kingdom period, if you know anything about Egyptian history. And then the Canaanite people in the region that Abraham and his family lived are just controlled by different Canaanite cities. And we talked about the Philistines who were there as well around that time.
Yeah, so as Fletcher just said everything, the story takes place in Canaan, which is modern-day Israel and parts of Jordan and Syria. And they also visit Haran, which is in modern-day Turkey.
Yeah. So Isaac is now 40 years old, and his wife Rebecca is barren. And they've been married for 20 years or so. They've had no children. And Isaac, of course, wants kids, as most people do. So he prays to God for his wife Rebecca to become pregnant, and it works. So and Rebecca becomes pregnant. Mm. Apparently, it was a difficult pregnancy because Rebecca ends up going and talking to God. He's like, why is this happening to me? This is so difficult. Why am I even alive? Right. So you can tell that she's not happy with how that pregnancy is going. And this is what God responds to Rebecca. And he says, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.
The older shall serve the younger.
That might be a little foreshadowing into what goes on later on in the story.
Yeah.
So we'll see. with this prophecy in mind, of course, Rebecca has twins, which is what it means, right? There's two nations in her womb. Two boys, an older son who was covered in red hair, and they called him Esau, and then a younger one, and his name was Jacob, and he came out grabbing his brother's heel. Yeah. And Jacob means heel grabber, and it has some alternate definitions or meanings that we could talk about later. But those are the two boys, came out of Rebecca, fighting already.
Yeah.
Now, an important note, if you remember back to last week's episode, there was an important blessing that Abraham received from God, and these were that he would inherit the land, that he would have descendants numbering like the stars, and that through him the whole world will be blessed. And this is the same blessing that Abraham passes on to his son Isaac, right. And now Isaac has to pass this on to his children. So just keep that in mind as we read the rest of the story. So Esau is the firstborn son, and he's his father's favorite. He's a hunter. He's an outdoorsy guy, hard, strong man. And Jacob is his mother's favorite, and he was a quieter, more tame. It says he liked to stay around the tent. Yeah. Yeah. So the famous story of Jacob and Esau is the story of the stew. So one day Esau comes home, and didn't catch anything hunting. He comes home, he's starving, and he goes, "Ooh, Jacob's making some stew. I'd like some stew, Jacob."
Lentil stew.
Yeah. Yummy. I don't know if that'd be good or not.
Lentil stew is very good.
Yeah, of course. Well, when you can't get any animals, well, you're gonna get lentil stew.
Yeah.
Anyway, Esau comes in ravishing with hunger. Ravenous with that's a better word. Ravenous with hunger. Yeah. Ravishing is more of a looks thing, I think. Ravenous with hunger. And asks Jacob for some stew, and Jacob, the swindler that he is, goes, No. If you want some of my stew, you're going to have to give me your birthright.
Yeah.
And it says Esau despised his blessing. Or sorry, despised his birthright.
What good is a birthright if I'm dead?
If I'm dead of hunger.
What a guy.
And so Esau swears off his birthright to Jacob. Jacob gives him the stew, and he eats it all up. And that's the end of that little clip of the story. Mm-hmm. Now, years later, Jacob and Esau are grown up and they're adults. And Isaac is getting really up in the years. He's actually blind. And he's ready to give out his blessing. He's like, okay, I don't know when I'm going to die, but it's soon, so I'm going to give out my blessing. And now the blessing was, to this family especially, keeping in mind what we talked about last week, was really important for the family. And it was to be given to the oldest son, and it was just the sign of passing from the father to the son. Mm-hmm. So Esau is sent to see Isaac, and Isaac goes, look, I don't know when I'm going to die, but I'm going to pass you on this blessing. Go out, catch me an animal, and make my favorite food for me, and then come see me. I'm going to give you your blessing. Yeah. And Rebecca, meanwhile, is sitting in the back, and she hears what Isaac says to Esau. And he's like, okay, how do I get Jacob? Remember, Esau was Isaac's favorite, and Jacob was Rebecca's favorite. Yeah. And how do I get Jacob this blessing? So she comes up with this plan and says, Jacob, go get some goats from the farm. Go kill them. They're dead. I'm going to make you some stew. I'm going to go bring it to your father. And then you're going to try to pass off as Esau and get this blessing. And Jacob's like, well, I'm not as hairy as Esau. I don't sound like Esau. How am I going to go get the blessing? Yeah. So Rebecca's like, oh, okay, here we go. We're going to tape not tape. They didn't have tape. They're going to attach some skin of a goat. That'll make you feel like Esau, and you just have to mimic your voice and make him sound like Esau.
Of course, raises the question: how hairy was this guy?
Sure.
That he felt like a goat.
Yeah, but goats aren't that hairy.
Have you felt a goat?
I mean, yes,
they're hairy.
Maybe
I think it said young goat, which was it's a younger goat, so it was softer.
I have a picture of Josh with a goat right here.
They look pretty hairy compared to Josh.
It's not
anyway,
that hairy.
I just don't know if I was blindfolded and somebody said, "Okay, I want you to reach out and tell me what this is." If I touched a goat and I was like, oh, that's a dude.
Like, he's on him though. He's still talking. Yeah. Rubbing Jay's arm. I'm
Isaac's
seeing how it feels like.
Getting a little senile too,
Yeah, I guess.
I guess so.
I mean,
he's on his deathbed. He's about to die. But anyway,
yeah.
Isaac ends up falling for this trick, and Jacob ends up getting the blessing that was meant for Esau. And then, of course, Esau comes back fresh from the hunt, and he brings his father the food that he was supposed to prepare and goes, I'm ready for my blessing. And Isaac goes, what do you mean? I just gave you the blessing. Yeah. And he goes, what?
Who's the senile one
Who's this? What are you talking about? And Esau figures out this whole plot and realizes that Jacob had tricked him.
Yeah.
And says, Father, can't you give me a blessing? And he goes, I can, but not the same one. You're going to have to get a different blessing. And so what we're actually going to do is read out the two blessings that Isaac gave out, and they're in Genesis chapter 27, verses 28. It starts for Jacob's blessing, and then 39 for Esau's blessing. So I'll read Jacob's, and then if Jay wants to read Esau's.
Okay.
So, then his father Isaac said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." He came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and said, "Blessed is him," and say, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed is everyone who blesses you."
Wow.
Ooh, and
It's a good one. Contrasted with, "Behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But it shall come about when you become restless that you will break his yoke from your neck."
So we have these two contrasting, and you notice that, the entirety of Jacob's blessing is prosperity and riches and blessings, and just lordship over everything that he does. And then you'll notice a section at the end there is curses everyone who cursed you and blesses everyone who blesses you. And that's the same part of a blessing that actually Abraham gets from God back a few chapters in Genesis. God says to Abraham, "Blessings to everybody who blesses you and curses to everybody who curses you." It's a continuation of this blessing that God has given Abraham to Isaac and now to Jacob instead of the eldest son who it was meant for. And then you look at Esau's, what he gets is you're going to have to struggle and fight and be under your brother for a time, and then eventually you'll break free from him. And so that's the main part of the story is what we want to talk about. They go on later on in life, and I think you can hear it in our first season if you want to go back and watch our Jacob and Esau episode.
Right.
It comes true. Jacob goes and runs away, actually, and goes to his uncle, who
Deceives him
too, and they have a whole debacle. But Jacob becomes really, really wealthy, gets tons of land, is very successful. And then Esau is a warlike man and has to fight for his survival and wealth, and they eventually meet and get back together. But the whole point is that this blessing that was meant for the eldest son is now in the hands of the younger, and Jacob ends up meeting with God, and there's a whole scenario that unfolds. But that's today's story.
Yeah, and I think that later part of the story actually is where we see, like, because it's when we look at this story, we're like, why God? Why
we haven't answered the question of why did God choose this guy instead?
And because we look at it and we're like, it doesn't make sense to use him at all. But what we do see later on in that striving episode with God is that in the middle of that, God stops and God says, "Okay, let go," and he says to God, "Give me a blessing." And God's response is, "What is your name?" And he has to answer Jacob, which means swindler. Like heel grabber is the kind of the literal, but that's actually a bit of a play on words in the Hebrew, that the heel grabber is like a way that you would trip somebody up. And so in actually saying his name, he's forced to
admit.
He's forced to come clean and be honest with himself and say, "I am a swindler." And God says, "Not anymore. This is who you are now." And so I think that one of the things that we uncover is, as unlikely as any of us are to be used by God, when we come to terms with who we are apart from him, he then is able to step in and say, "No, not anymore. This is who you are. This is who I'm making you." And that's why we can see someone as unlikely as Jacob step into, because I think sometimes we want to justify some of the ridiculous things that we do and say, well, Jacob swindled his way into, right? And that, I think that's an
You're
abuse.
missing the point.
It's an abuse of the text, to be honest. It's more about coming to terms and being honest with who we are apart from him.
And I think it's a really cool picture that the way that he came into relationship with God is, first of all, by striving with him, wrestling with him. And then when God asked him what his name is, he admitted, he had to admit that that's what he was, and that he was wrong, specifically for that swindling and wrongdoings that he'd done in the past. And then, God uses that and says, not anymore. I like that. It's a really cool picture.
Yeah.
But with the unlikely people, we can list off the things that Jacob was and why he was unlikely. He was, first of all, is the second born, and that's a big deal back then. Less of a deal now, but like the inheritance, he wasn't supposed to inherit his father's wealth. He wasn't supposed to inherit his father's lands, people, servants, animals, everything, or the blessing that came from God. Yeah. And we get Jacob anyway.
Yeah. It's interesting parallel. Jesus talks about another second-born who wants his inheritance and takes it basically prematurely, squanders it, and then realizes what he's done and returns home to the Father. And he uses that as a parallel for ourselves. So I think it's really important when we read the story of Jacob to be reading it with that in mind, and to be asking ourselves some difficult questions about who we are and our relationship with God.
Yeah. So you answered the question about how is Jacob unlikely. So how does Jacob being unlikely fit into the rest of the story of the Bible?
Absolutely. So the big topic today was the idea of inheritance. We talked about what they're owed when they're born, and Jay brought up the prodigal son, which is a really, really good story about inheritance. But the inheritance that we have as Christians is something different to what Jacob received or what Jesus was talking about, or it was along the same lines as what Jesus was talking about. But the inheritance that we have in God, and it says that we will inherit the kingdom of God. We become part of God's family. We are children of God. And that is something, in 1 Peter it says, it's an inheritance that is imperishable and undefiled and unfading, and it's kept in heaven for you by God's power. And it's guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed. Yeah. So it's something that we cannot squander, we cannot lose, but it's something that God keeps for us, and that's meant for us.
And that we don't have to swindle in order to receive. Yes, we don't. In fact, we simply receive it. That's all we do to receive it is receive it.
So I think that answers the question of Jacob's idea of inheritance, and that's what God had blessed him with. But as Christians, we can look back and say, this is what God has now blessed us with.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Praise God.
All right. Well, I guess that ends today's episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Bye for now.